In today's class, we'll talk about cell cycle. As you all know, that cell is the basic structural and functional unit of all the living organisms. And living organisms possess different characteristics. Among them, one is their growth. So how is this growth possible? It is possible just because of the cell division. And cell division in turn is a part of cell cycle. The question arises here, what is cell cycle? So cell cycle is basically the sequence of changes or the series of changes which occurs during two consecutive cell divisions. As you can see here that this cell is undergoing the cell cycle and multiple changes are happening and then the cycle is completing. Now this cycle consists of two phases. First phase is called interphase and the other phase is called M phase. Interphase is a non-division phase in which the cell prepares itself for the cell division. It happens in the M phase, which is the division phase. So what particular things or what particular events are happening during these two phases, we'll discuss them one by one. First phase is basically the interphase. As you can see here, this interphase, it is the period of the cell cycle between the two consecutive cell division, and during this period multiple changes are happening within the cell except cell division. It consists of gap 1 or G1 phase, synthesis or S phase, and gap 2 or G2 phase. Now what is happening in these sub phases, we'll discuss them one by one. So G1 phase, which is the first phase of the interphase, in this particular phase a lot of things are happening as protein synthesis is taking place. Protein synthesis increases over here. RNA synthesis is happening because in order to prepare the proteins we need RNA, all types of RNA like messenger RNA, transfer RNA, ribosomal RNA. We'll be needing all sorts of RNA. So RNA synthesis is happening over here. In order to provide cell with the energy to carry out this whole process, ATP is required. So ATP synthesis is also taking place in this phase. Beside this, in the S phase, where this replication of DNA will take place, raw material is required for that. So raw material preparation or raw material synthesis is also happening in the G1 phase. Just because of these things happening in the G1 or gap 1 phase, the cell size increases. It means the cell growth can easily be seen during this phase. At this point, what could happen to the cell? The cell may proceed to S phase or it may go to the G0 phase, where the cell cycle stops as the cell cannot undergo cell division. But this does not mean that the cell has dead. The cell is still living, it is performing its normal function, but it won't divide at G0 phase. If the G1 phase proceeds to the next phase, that is the S phase, is the synthesis phase of the DNA, so a multiple sort of changes are happening over here. So in S phase, DNA replication is taking place, centriole division is happening so that the spindle fiber could be formed, and one other important protein is forming, which is histone protein. As you know that histone protein is very much important for the DNA to coil itself around. So in S phase, three things are happening. DNA replication is happening, centriole division is happening, and histone protein synthesis is happening. Why is it so? Because you know that since the cell that is entering the cell cycle is diploid, and in the end of cell division, that is the mitotic division, what will happen? The cell will give two daughter cells, and for that particular cell there should be enough amount of material present so that the cell will be normal. So in S phase everything is happening. Once this phase is finished, then the cell enters the G2 phase. In it, there are different sort of proteins are being synthesized, like tubulin protein and other proteins that are required for the division phase. Beside this, ATP synthesis is also taking place, and obviously the RNA synthesis increases during this G2 phase. And at this phase, the cell grows again in size. After that, the cell enters the division phase, and this division is mitotic division. What is mitosis? It is basically a type cell division in which the parent cell divides into two daughter cells which are containing the equal amount of DNA, equal number of chromosomes as that of the parent cell. So mitosis is the division phase, which in turn consists of two phases. One is called karyokinesis, which is basically the nuclear division, and the other is cytokinesis, which is the cytoplasmic division. So in the end, we get two daughter cells. This is it about the cell cycle. You learned about two phases. One is the non-division phase, interphase, and in this phase, a lot of things are happening. Different proteins are being synthesized, different enzymes that are required for different materials that is happening in the growth phase, and the synthesis and replication of DNA is being taking place, and then cell division ultimately, that is dividing the cell into two daughter cells. This is how cell cycle proceeds, and it is happening in every living organism normally at different pace. Sometimes cell cycle its span could be 20 minutes, or it could be as lengthy as several days or several weeks, depending on the requirement of the body. So that's all for today's class. We'll learn something different in our next class. Till then, take care.